Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of HK-87 Assassin Droid Arcana version from the Ahsoka series VC330. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. I absolutely love the Ahsoka live action series, and as a collector I'm really happy to see this series getting a lot of love in the Vintage Collection line. We have a pretty good assortment of figures, a lot of them still in the pipeline yet to come out, but I'm really enjoying collecting them up. For us here in New Zealand, we have a new wave of Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figures that have just hit a local retailer, and amongst them is the HK-87 Assassin Droid Arcana version from the Ahsoka series, so I was really happy and excited to pick this one up as soon as it arrived. I've been waiting for it. Now, of course, we already have an HK-87 Assassin Droid figure from the Ahsoka series, but when we put these two side by side, we can see that they are different. I'm really keen to get stuck in and do some comparisons between these two figures. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll open this figure up and check out all of the details, but first, let's take one last look at the backing card. To talk about the backing card, I'm going to have the older original version of the HK Assassin Droid figure here, just because it's interesting to compare the two side by side. Of course, they both have that Vintage Collection packaging style inspired by the original Kenner vintage action figures of the 70s and 80s. We have the Star Wars logo here at the top and that fantastic Ahsoka series logo here at the top, and a single chrome racetrack surrounding the character art there on the side. What I think is interesting is we have slightly different accessories between the two. The original older version comes with a blaster rifle here, and I think because of that small accessory, this one has the warning sign here, not for children under 3. This one, the accessory is a long staff, which this one also has, but I guess this does not register as a choking hazard because we do not have that warning box on this particular backing card. And we can see that we have very different accent colors between these two figures. The original one is this kind of a vibrant lime green with black text that reads HK-87 Assassin Droid. The new one, it is a vibrant red with white text, and we also have HK-87 Assassin Droid, but now we have the little subtitle here, Arcana, there in brackets. And as I noted, this one only has a staff weapon, this one has a staff and blaster rifle. They both have soft goods elements there, but they do look different. This one looks like a much bigger cloak there. Really interesting to see this one out of the packaging because the cloak is a little bit more hidden behind it. But it's really fun to see just how different these are. I know it's kind of interesting to have two versions of what is essentially an army builder droid, but with the paint jobs they look very different, and I'm always excited to see new and unique characters and droids getting different backing cards, especially neat for the fans and collectors that like to keep their figures on their backing cards. They look very different, really cool to see them side by side. So if you do want to army build them, you're going to have different backing cards, which I think is quite fun. Turning the backing cards around, you can see the older original HK-87 backing card here, VC330, and we still had the backing card style that was inspired by the original Kenner action figures with that black background there, the Star Wars logo, the twin chrome racetrack surrounding the preview images of other action figures available, and the lower half, of course, we've got all of the barcode and copyright text. The newer one was released after the change, so now we have the different style. We've got the accent color from the backing card front, of course, for this figure it is red, so we have a lot of red here. We have a VC330, an image of the backing card here, and also a photo of an action figure out of the packaging posed with accessories. I kind of like seeing some of the posing options here. We can see how the figure is going to hold the accessory, and we can also see the soft goods cape a little bit better because on the actual figure it's tucked in behind, so I do kind of like that. We also have a blurb about the character here. It reads, "Assassins by design, the HK-87 droids loyal to Morgan Elsbeth have served her as tireless bodyguards and enforcers." Now, comparing these two side by side, we can see that Hasbro has indeed shrunk the text on the back here just a little bit, so we get a little bit more of the interesting sort of imagery here at the top. The logo for the Vintage Collection is also a little bit larger than it is on this one. I know this one's very very nostalgic, but I honestly don't mind either. Sometimes when they reissue figures that were originally packaged with this style, sometimes the new ones have this packaging. So I guess that does matter if you are keeping them in their packaging. But overall, I don't really mind. I am going to be opening mine up. So I do keep my backing cards, but what it looks like on the back is not really going to bother me. I think they look really cool on the front. I like that we've got very different photos there to be used for the character art. This one especially, I think I like this one a little bit better. It's just a little bit more lighter posed. You know, we can sort of see the movement there. It's a little bit more lighter in its tone. This one is a little bit darker, but overall they look pretty cool. Interesting that we've got such different accent colors for the two there as well. Something that I think is kind of interesting, this one is pictured here with the blaster rifle. This one is pictured with the sort of the force pike staff here, and you can see we've got that sort of electro effect there. Something that I think would have been potentially really cool is to have a bit of a translucent plastic accent piece, like a little accessory piece that could be slotted on over this to kind of give it that electro field effect there on the force pike, much like some of the older sort of force effects that you could put around Count Dooku's hand. It wasn't sort of attached to his hand, it kind of went around his hand. I think that that would have been cool. Just another sort of little fun little accessory, but either way, I do like that we've got these iconic staff there. I think they look really cool and interesting that we have different accessories. So now it's time to open this one up. So now I have the HK-87 figure and the staff weapon accessory out of the packaging, so we can go over all of the details. And I'm quite excited to get my first proper look at the soft goods cape. It was tucked in behind the figure. You couldn't really see it, but now I can fully get a view of it. And it's not a full cape. It's kind of more of just a sort of a slender piece sort of hanging down the back. And we can see that it has a quite interesting asymmetrical hem. It's not straight across. We don't sort of have that sort of weathering there. It's kind of like slightly irregular, sort of a freehand cut. We've even got the sort of corner cut off. Because I only have this one figure, I don't know if they're all like this or whether it's sort of supposed to be like this. Perhaps this is maybe like a little bit of a sort of, don't want to say sloppy, but just a little bit unusual. Sometimes you find some that don't look like they've been cut with the most care. So I'm not really sure if this corner is supposed to be cut off, just sort of part of the quirk of a weathered hem here, or perhaps it was just perhaps a little bit more sort of the fabric was all sort of pinched in and sort of cut really fast. And so we've got this little corner that's kind of been cut off and unintentionally. But something that I think is interesting, if I just grab the backing card here, is on the promotional image, we can see the cape comes all the way down to the knees, and it kind of looks a little bit more sort of straight across as a hem there with a sort of a weathered edge there. But when I look at the picture of the action figure on the back here, we can see that it is kind of high, and because of the way it's kind of flowing off the left shoulder here, it does give it a little bit of a pointed asymmetrical hem here. And we can see that we've got that sort of nice sort of sash, sort of almost like a scarf around the neck, and the way that it flows around there. So I'm going to see if I can gently turn mine around and kind of get it to flow over the shoulder, just like they have pictured on the backing card. I'm hoping it's not sort of secured in place around the neck, that it is like a scarf and I can turn it. So let's give that a little nudge. Okay, that's pretty good. It feels like there's maybe something catching just underneath the helmet here, but it's probably just the fabric catching on the actual sculpting of the headpiece there. And now I can kind of get it flowing a little bit more over the shoulder like it was pictured there. It still just looks a little bit odd with that corner cut off, but I like the way that the fabric flows down here. It does have a raw hem. I am still getting little bits of fluff coming off of the edge, but I'm going to be quite careful with it. It is a thinner fabric. It kind of feels like a sort of a cotton blend, like a very thin t-shirt fabric, not like the sort of shiny polyester fabrics that we typically see on capes like the Darth Vader one. So it's got a nice soft drape. I do think it's a very nice fabric. If it was thicker, I think it might sort of sit a little bit funny. And I like the way it's sort of stitched so it sits here around. You can sort of play with that a little bit and get it to lay really nicely there. I love soft good elements on my figures. There always just sort of adds an extra element to it. I prefer it over plastic capes. Plastic capes are very heavy. They can restrict articulation and they can throw figures off a balance. I know I put most of my figures on stands. They do have peg holes in the underside, but this is asymmetrical, and he's got a very sort of K2SO style body with the sort of big bulk up here in the chest and very skinny skinny legs, almost like battle droid legs down here. I don't really want him tipping over because of a heavy cape. I love this soft goods cape, even if it does have a weird hem. Because it's not laser cut, this looks like it was just done with scissors. You could take scissors to it and kind of create your own slightly more weathered hem, or perhaps you want to straighten it out. You are free to edit this, because it's not really going to change the overall look of the figure too much. It's not like sort of playing around with the stitching up here. Now, I don't like to remove pieces of my figures, so I'm not going to pull the helmet off to pull the soft goods cape off. You might, if you're sort of really rough, you might be able to pull this one off without removing the head, but I don't want to stress the stitching and sort of the way that the fabric is flowing around here. So I'm just going to move the cape around to check out the details and articulation underneath. I really like the headpiece of this particular figure. It doesn't have that sort of old school Jawa action figure trick where we have sort of a clear lens piece here that sort of flows through to the visor, so it looks illuminated because light can pass through. But we have this sort of really nice red gloss paint used for the visor here on this particular sort of droid helmet, and I really like it. It catches the light, and in some angles it almost looks like it's lit because that red just really catches my attention there. We've got some nice little silver painted details here off to the right side of the helmet. And we've got different paint to that original first version, which was a brighter red. We've got a darker sort of wine sort of colored red here, a lot on the lower half of the body, with a dark metallic silver, sort of a gunmetal color used around the joints. We've got the knees, elbows, a little bit of the wrist, ankles, we've got some at the toes there. And then moving up to the upper part of the body, we've also got sort of a cream and a light gray that matches the helmet there as well. The painting on this figure looks pretty clean. It looks like Hasbro has done the trick of casting things in different plastic colors, so you don't have to get too complicated with paint. We've got a little bit of paint here on the sort of burgundy section to match the cream color of the torso, and again on the arms we have a cream paint here to match these sections. This actually looks like a cream colored plastic, and the shoulders look like they are a gray plastic, same as the head, so it cuts down on the risks of having unfortunate paint accidents there. So this one was brand new. I didn't get to see it alongside other figures. Likewise with that cape, I wouldn't have been able to see or compare it to others. And now we can have a little look at the back. I don't actually see too much in the way of painted elements on the back here. It looks like they're all sort of sculpted in their colored plastics, with the exception of those armbands, which are of course visible at the front. They go all the way around to the back. So now that I've moved the cape, this looks like this is actually to hold that staff weapon. That looks like I might be able to clip that in there. It's very thin, but that kind of looks like that, or perhaps that is left over from the sculpting of the original one to hold on to the blaster rifle. I will just give that a very subtle, gentle test to see if that staff weapon will actually click in there, but I'm thinking that might be for the blaster rifle from the original version. When Hasbro reissues things, they don't necessarily take off elements that are not really relevant for the newer casting. It is hidden behind the cape, so it doesn't bother me if that is a leftover from the earlier design. That other version of the HK-87 does come with a blaster rifle accessory that this one does not. So if that's designed for that rifle, we're not going to need it on this one. But I like that that backpack piece looks like a separate piece attached in there. So we've got a lot of detail lines there. We can see the sort of the connection points between all of the plastic components. Really tidy. I like the level of detail. Of course, we've got sort of all the droid lines, the hinges and stuff like that. Droids, their circular sort of joints always work well in action figure form. It does a really good job of just sort of working with the articulation points. Flipping that back around there, we can see that we still have a mid-thigh articulation point. Sometimes it's a little bit higher to sort of hide itself under tunics, but here we have it a little bit more closer to the knee. Actually, it's a little bit more midline. So working with the sculpting of the original droid design, so that works out really well. So overall, pretty tidy paint. I don't think there's anything that I can really critique on this. It doesn't have weathering, like sort of scratched silver or anything like that. Just really tidy. It looks good. Nothing really to it's always a great time for a collector when you open up a figure and you don't really notice any sort of paint flaws. Very nice. So let's test out the articulation. So I'm not expecting to get too much with the head because we've got a lot of fabric around the neck, but let's just test that out. Okay, that looks good. Not too much forward because of course we've got fabric under the neck. I can tip it back and side to side. The cape does move a little bit when I'm doing that because it's tucked in underneath and we're just kind of pivoting that around a little bit. Now the joints on this do feel a little bit thin, so I'm going to be just a little bit careful because I don't want to break anything, and I'm just making sure that these are lined up because I'm not sure if this shoulder piece, if that's actually joined to the, no, it's hinged. Okay, wasn't sure if that was actually going to be attached to the arm. It kind of looked like it. So if that is attached at the shoulder, it's going to float up a little bit because I can sort of just gesture there. It's kind of just above that arm. So it's going to flex up. The arms are very stiff, but they often are straight out of the box. So you can see that we've got sort of a slightly awkward angle, that those pieces are no longer sort of lying flush with the arms, but we can move the arms up. You know, a lot of droids, they just hold blaster weapons, so we don't need to get too adventurous with their arm poses, but this one has a staff weapon, which is a little bit more akin to a lightsaber in terms of the poses that we're going to want to do. So I do want to be able to really move his arms around. So I'm going to be careful with his elbows because they're really small little joints, but we can get pretty standard articulation. Very stiff, just of course we've got them fresh out of the packet there, and we can swivel there as well. Just notice that tiny little bit of silver paint there on the chest detail. There is just those two little square boxes there, really nice and little tidy. This arm is just a little bit stiffer. Going to have to sort of loosen that one up a little bit. It doesn't want to come in close to the body just at this point. I'm just going to have to sort of really work that joint and get it just a little bit less sort of stuck there. I can move the hands around as expected. Now the hands are actually kind of interesting because of course they're droid hands. They're not going to be the same sort of grip or sort of fingers, but we've got sort of a nice grip there for holding the staff weapon. A little bit more of a rounder grip here. I don't know. Curious to see if we can get it into a two-handed staff pose there, like we can do for some of the characters that, you know, do the two-handed lightsaber grip as well. Let's see. Okay, that's an interesting sort of movement point there at the mid-torso. It's a little bit stiff because of the sculpting. It fits in there really tight. So when I turn it, I feel like these corners are kind of fighting against the sculpted dark gray part there. It's kind of pushing on that, and I don't really want to turn that around too much to the side, and it's not really giving me too much backwards and forwards. It's not hitting a clicking point or anything. There's just a tiny little bit of a wiggle, but that's not really helping me with a pose. It's not going to hold that position. There is a swivel point below the belt that I think is more of the sort of turning point, of course, because droids can have more points of articulation than humans can. So I like that we've got this sort of extra swivel point, and that's where I can really get that posing in there. But that's not really got a front and back either. And looking here at the back, we can see how that sort of lines up when I turn it at that below the, it looks like a belt. It's not really a belt because it's not sort of clothing in the same way, but it's sculpted like a belt, so that's what I'm calling it. And then we can see that torso section at the upper part. It just, I feel like I don't want to push that more than just sort of this movement, which technically that's articulated, but it's not really going to help me with any kind of different poses when it's on the shelf. And to be honest, I'm not too bothered by that because of the way we've got this really tight sculpting. I want it to line up nicely. That looks really nice in the way these panels all fit together. I don't want to really sort of mess that up and get them out of alignment. And I'm going to be doing poses with the arms and legs, not so much with the torso on a droid. I don't expect droids to have too much flexibility in the torso. I don't really think of, you know, just droids having that kind of, you know, flexibility. Maybe the assassin droids, you know, we could get them into some really interesting poses, but that just doesn't really want to sort of click through here so much. But moving on to the legs, free as anything. I can get that up really high because there's absolutely nothing in the way that's going to affect the ability to move there, because you can clearly see the hinges there for the hips here on this droid. You know, there's nothing that we really have to worry about. Going out to the side, not as much, because they are a little bit more higher with these leg plates. I can get it to about there, and of course that's just completely hitting. But in terms of, you know, front, back, all of that kind of swivel action, absolutely fine, nice and easy there. We can swivel there at that thigh point there, but the lines are going to become sort of misaligned here. I like it when everything lines up, so I'm probably not going to utilize that pivot point. And here with the knees, so we'll see how far we can get back. Okay, I can get it to about there, which is pretty good. Pretty small little joins, but that sculpting works pretty well with the dark gray sort of joins here with the droid knees. And oh, stiff ankles, we can get to about there. Pretty nice point. We don't have sort of the boot sculpting to worry about, just nice tidy little circular droid attachment points there. But I'm probably not going to be doing that much bending at the knees, because I want him to stand up and I want him to hold a staff and sort of balance. Now, I've played around with his legs a little bit and he still stands up reasonably well, which, to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised about. His legs do look so thin for the top half of his body. I'm glad that he still stands up reasonably well, even though I've gone and played with his legs a bit. So just going to take a quick little look at the staff weapon here. So it is slightly asymmetrical. It took me a minute. So when it was packaged in at the box, this end is slightly longer. This sort of triangular point part here is slightly longer than this end, and when it was packaged, this was pointing up and this one is at the bottom. So I'm going to take this as the actual sort of weapon end. If we had sort of that electricity effect on it, it would be over this end as pictured on the backing card. So I'm going to have this end pointed up. So it's kind of just like a dark sort of gunmetal gray for the whole thing. There's a lot of detail lines that I can feel very easily running my finger over it, but there doesn't look like there's any additional paint there. It's quite long and it does look reasonably straight, which is important for these long staff weapons. You don't want them looking really bendy. I can bend it a little bit without feeling like it's going to snap. So it's got some flex, which may help us in getting a two-handed pose. Sometimes you just need to get a little tiny curve there, a little bit of flex to get it to join up between the hand grips there. But overall, very nice. Probably exactly the same as the one that comes with the other HK-87 figure, but that's okay. I'm sure they would be issued with the same weapon. So I'm going to go and put it into the main weapon hand, which I'm hoping is not going to be too much of a fuss. Sometimes these little figures, their wrists just want to rotate through. I don't think I'm going to be able to. Sometimes with lightsabers you can go in like that and sort of push it through, but we've got a very wide section here, so I'm probably going to have to maneuver this through the hand, and that went in very nicely. Okay, so it does kind of angle down, so we're going to be using some of that sort of rotation for the hands to get into a good pose, so it's not sort of hitting the body or anything like that. But that holds pretty easily. Let's see how well he stands up now that I've put that in his hand. Okay, a little bit of a wobble, but he does stand up even holding that completely out from the body. Nice balance. That's really exciting, and he looks cool there holding his weapon. Sometimes, you know, characters that have weapons, they just look a little bit more complete when they are holding them. So I am not sure how successful I'm going to be with getting this figure to hold it in two hands. Let's give it a go. This hand is a little bit tighter. Okay, let's see. Yeah, this one, he kind of wants to let go. It's going to take just a minute. As soon as I get it in one hand, he's letting go with the other. But just very quickly, I can get something like that between the two hands. So that's going to just take just a little bit of finessing, a little bit of working with the figure just to get the right kind of pose that works for you. I know sometimes with these staff weapons, hey, he even stands up. Sometimes with these staff weapons, you can kind of having them touching the ground as a little bit of like a cane or a crutch to help us steady those figures that really don't want to stand up on their own. But he actually stands up holding that completely away from the body. He's just a little bit unsteady in some sections there, but you know, with a little bit of work, I'm sure I will find a pretty good standing up pose. There we go. That looks pretty cool. I like this. This looks fun. Really fun accessory. So I'm going to spend some time just getting him to hold that a little bit better. But overall, he's pretty cool. I'm not quite sure exactly what I really think about this lower hem though. That's just the one thing that's kind of making me sort of stop and pause there for a minute. I'm not sure if this is entirely intentional or a bit of a flaw. I don't have examples to compare to because it is a different cape to the original one as well. So I don't know if sometimes I think I'm going to go in there and do a little bit of editing, and other times I'm like, you know what, it's not really bothering me, so I guess time will tell. Overall, I really like these droids in the Ahsoka series. It was really fun seeing them in the Mandalorian episode with Morgan Elsbeth, and of course we saw more of them in the Ahsoka series, and I like that I can army build them because they look a little bit different. We've got some different coloring and stuff like that. It's really fun with those different backing cards, different accessories. Really fun. I'm really loving the Ahsoka series figures from the Vintage Collection line. Some fantastic characters with many more yet to come. I am waiting for the Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati figures in the Vintage Collection line. They are going to be fantastic. I can't wait to add those to my collection, but for now I've got another HK-87 assassin droid to add to my display shelf. This is really fun. I like it a lot. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars action figure, checked out the details and accessories, and had a lot of fun like usual. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a Vintage Collection fan, I recently opened up the Morgan Elsbeth figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Vintage Collection playlist. This is the way.